Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live.
Hi, hello, good morning again, all, and thank you so much for logging on as we continue with our learning tips for the AI Energy Hackathon. Before we bring on our speaker for today, Mr. Baldev Singh, I just want to take a moment to speak directly to all of our students participating in this AI Energy Hackathon. What you are a part of right now is not just another program or competition. This is real world problem solving. You are working with actual energy data, not something theoretical, but information that reflects how your school operates every single day. That means the work you are doing has real meaning and real potential for impact. And what makes this hackathon different is that we are asking you to think differently. We are asking you to use AI not just as a tool, but as a thinking partner. Now, that is important because AI is not here to replace your thinking, it is here to enhance it. It helps you to analyze faster, it helps you to see patterns, it helps you to test ideas, but the insight, the creativity, the solution, that still comes from you. So, as you participate in these mentorship sessions, I want you to shift your mindset slightly. Don't just listen, don't just take notes, start applying in real time. When you hear about electricity fundamentals, ask yourself, where is this happening in my school? When you learn about energy consumption, ask, what is driving our usage? When you hear about efficiency, ask, where are we wasting energy? Because the strongest projects will come from the students who are able to connect what they are learning directly to their environment. And let me say this clearly, you do not need to have the perfect idea from the start. This process is about exploration. It is about testing, refining, improving. Some of the best solutions come from simple observations. A light left on unnecessarily. Think about it. Was the light necessary when you were inside the classroom? But when you leave the classroom, you turn it off. Similarly, I would like you to start using these same methodologies at your homes. Wasting energy can happen anywhere, be it in your school or at your home. An air conditioning system running inefficiently, think about it. Equipment being used at the wrong times. So in school, you may have certain types of equipment, whether it's in a workshop environment or in your laboratory. So think about those things being left plugged in. When you combine these observations with data and then apply AI to analyze and validate your ideas, that is where innovation begins. And this is where you move from just being students to becoming problem solvers. Now, I also want to encourage you, do not be afraid of the data. Sometimes when you see the numbers, charts, or data sets, it can feel overwhelming. But remember, data is just a story. Your job is to interpret that story. What is the data telling you about your school? What patterns do you see over time? Where are the peaks? Where are the drops? What might be causing those changes? And then, how can you respond? Because at the end of this hackathon, it's not just about presenting an idea. It is about presenting a solution that is practical, data driven, and capable of making a real difference. And I want you to really take that in. You are not just competing, you are contributing. If even one idea from this hackathon can be implemented in a school and reduces energy consumption, that is the real impact. That is cost savings, that is environmental benefit, and that is leadership. And that is exactly what this initiative is about, building a generation of young people who are not just aware of challenges, but equipped to solve them. So please take full advantage of these sessions. Engage with your mentors, ask questions, challenge ideas, collaborate with your teammates, and most importantly, apply what you are learning, because this is where knowledge becomes action, and action is what drives change. And just before we transition, I want to leave you with one thought. Don't try to build the most complicated project. Focus on building the most effective one. Clarity beats complexity. Understanding the problem deeply will always lead to stronger solutions than trying to impress with something overly technical. So stay focused, stay curious, and stay committed to the process. And with that, I believe this sets the stage perfectly for the discussion ahead. At this point, I would like to invite Mr. Donald Baldev Singh to take us further into understanding the relationship between energy and climate change and how this connects directly to the work you are doing in this hackathon. Thank you for listening. Mr. Baldev Singh?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Postam, and welcome to all who are taking part in the hackathon from CZITT, what we call the Energy AI Hackathon. And to those who are live looking at this broadcast and those who will look at it through our YouTube channel, welcome. Let me start by saying that we at CZITT see this as a very important undertaking to present to you not just a problem about climate change, but potential solutions, and to put those solutions in your own hands. We are very grateful to UNICEF for their sponsorship of this initiative, and to TNTEC, the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, for helping us with sponsorship and support with the data that you would be using. You, the young people of the world, are going to grow up in a different world to the one we saw when we were your age. Climate change is going to have the greatest impact on our lives. Our intention at CZITT is to make sure that you understand what's coming and understand what you can do about it. In other words, climate change must not become climate strange to you. You must be the knowledge holders about climate change, and you must be the ones who can take the actions at this current stage that you're in, and later on in your lives, and perhaps in your working life, if you decide to choose a career that involves climate action. So we are going today to talk about electricity and the impact it has on climate change. And to help you to understand that in this hackathon, you are looking for solutions to reducing our energy, particularly our electricity consumption, and then therefore reducing the impact that we have on climate change through something we call our carbon footprint. So you should be seeing now a series of slides, and I'll be using them as I talk to you. What is our carbon footprint to start with? Our carbon footprint, and there's a question in our climate quiz about that says, is it our old shoes when we throw them out? Well, no. It's about individually and as part of the groups that we are involved with, how much carbon emissions are produced. Typically, we can look at per day, or per month or per year? What is the extent of the carbon emissions that come from our actions? And carbon emissions, I will talk about in this presentation. And also, I will talk about how it is part of the greenhouse gas emissions and the greenhouse gas effect. So let's dive into it. Next slide, please. So you will soon be seeing some of the slides that we have prepared. Right. So here's one that you may have known already. Trinidad and Tobago, a little twin island state, are a big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions per capita, per person, among the highest in the world. And I'm told that we are currently number 6 in the world. That is not a good statistic. It means that as a person, our country produces more carbon emissions for each one of us than most of the countries in the world. Next slide, please. So where do those emissions come from? Next slide. Here's a graphic that you could take time to internalize. You could come back to it later on. But this is the breakdown of our total carbon emissions by sector in Trinidad and Tobago. So if you look on the left side of this slide, that is our ammonia industry. Trinidad and Tobago is one of the world's largest producers of ammonia, which is used as a fertilizer and as other chemical use. Now, that's a proud position for us to be in. And in fact, there was a time we were the largest exporter of ammonia in the world. But every ton of ammonia we produce, we put 2.5 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that is why you see the big impact there of our ammonia industry. Next, coming across at the top center are the carbon emissions from power generation. So we produce power primarily by burning natural gas at the power stations. And you heard some of that already in this series, and we will talk some more about it later on. Trinidad and Tobago is a large producer of natural gas. So naturally, we use the gas to produce electricity. However, natural gas is a hydrocarbon. It's the cleanest of the hydrocarbons, meaning that when you burn natural gas, it produces less harmful emissions than burning diesel oil or heavy fuel oil or worse, coal. But it still is a hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon means it's made up of carbon and hydrogen. And when you burn it to produce energy, the results are the hydrogen becomes H2O, water, and the carbon becomes CO2, carbon dioxide. So this is why you see the top center, it shows the relative amount of carbon emissions from our power industry. Next to that, on the top right, is our emissions from production of liquefied natural gas. Now, we are one of the top 10, I think we still are, producers of LNG in the world, but the LNG industry has a consequence in that it generates carbon dioxide. Now, you could study this graphic more later on to understand where our emissions come from. And you could see that on the outside, on the right-hand side, is something called AFOLU, agriculture, forestry, and other land use. In fact, this part of the carbon picture is where we absorb carbon from the atmosphere. We absorb carbon through agricultural activities and through forestry activities and other land use. that actually result in bringing down our carbon emissions. But you could see it right there, how much carbon dioxide we produce versus how much we reduce the carbon dioxide by. And you could see the mismatch. And you could understand why we need to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that we are producing and increase the amount of carbon emissions that we are removing from the atmosphere. Okay, next slide, please. Now, why does it matter? It has to do with something called the greenhouse effect. And in this slide, on the left side of the graphic, you could see what is the natural greenhouse gas effect. The greenhouse effect naturally occurs because there's always a certain amount of carbon emissions being produced in the operations of in the natural environment or in industry. And before what they call the Industrial Revolution, the system used to balance itself, meaning that the amount of carbon emissions we produce used to be naturally broken down in the atmosphere such that it did not have a net effect on the world. However, since the Industrial Revolution, and you should go back and see how long ago that was, we are producing a lot more carbon emissions in our daily lives, in how we live, in how we travel, in how we operate our businesses, and in all aspects of our life, manufacturing, commerce, every part of our daily lives produces carbon emissions. And in fact, we are producing more carbon emissions, and I use it interchangeably with greenhouse gas emissions, than the system could accommodate. So what happens now is that you have a layer of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is not reducing or disintegrating at the rate that it needs to be to have a perfect balance. What does this carbon dioxide do? Why does it matter? It matters because it creates a shield that prevents heat from escaping back into the universe when it is reflected off the Earth's surface. And in fact, what you have is that excuse me, heat energy bounces off this layer of carbon dioxide and is reflected back to Earth, and may bounce, some of it may reflect back into the air and reflect again back to Earth. So what you're seeing is a gradual heating up of the atmosphere and of the Earth's surface. And that then causes temperature to rise. And what is called the greenhouse effect is also related to what is called global warming. And the global warming effect tends to melt the icebergs, the polar ice caps are melting, causing the ocean to rise. Then you have the ocean temperature is rising, and that is reducing the amount of marine life and changes up the whole ocean in terms of what can survive and what maybe some pests that are thriving in this system. So the greenhouse effect is causing all of that. It is causing, and we see it all the time, what you call extreme weather events. So in other words, in the wet season, we have a lot more rain and much higher in shorter periods than we used to have. And also, we have longer dry spells, which makes it very difficult to produce food. So there are a number of effects that are consequent to the greenhouse gas effect. And those are what we are experiencing at this moment. Next slide, please. Right. Here is something that you need to pay attention to, please. This is the daily usage of electricity in kilowatt hours for Trinidad and Tobago. So you can get this from the TNTech app, where you can see your electricity bill And you can see how much greenhouse gas was produced in order for you to have that electricity. And this is because every time we turn on a light, it means that we are consuming electricity. And most of the electricity in Trinidad and Tobago is produced by burning natural gas. So it goes right back to the power station where more molecules of hydrocarbon, natural gas, is burned to produce electricity, and therefore more carbon emissions go up into the atmosphere. Now, keep in mind this daily trend, because here's your first hint. In the hackathon, you will be looking at this for your school. You will be considering daily how much electricity you use, and then you think about it for your home as well. And from that, how much carbon emissions are produced. And this is then contributing to what we called earlier the carbon footprint of your school, and similarly for your home, or even you as a person. How much carbon emissions do you cause to be produced? Now, we can't shut down all of life, but we could reduce the amount of electricity we use and therefore reduce how much carbon emissions are produced. Now, this kind of information is brought to you by one of our partners in the hackathon, and CZITT is very happy to have a company called Screaming Power out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, that on a daily basis produces this information for TNTech customers. So when you go to the TNTech app and you say, what is my current bill? You get that information and you say, how much greenhouse gas was produced for me to have that amount of electricity? Then Screaming Power does that calculation and presents it back to you in the TNTech app. I encourage you to go and get familiar with it, because now you will start to understand the relationship between your electricity usage and greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. So, what can you do about it? Well, you can reduce the amount of electricity you use in your school, in your home, in your daily lives. And that would reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we produce in the country. How do you do that? Well, you can do immediate things like turning off lights, turning off computers, unplugging your cell phone chargers. Because if you leave it plugged in, even if it's not charging the phone, it is consuming electricity in the charger block itself. You can turn off air conditioning. You can reduce how much heat you use by showering in hot water. And as you look around, you will find that there are many ways at your school and at your home that you could reduce your carbon emissions on a recurring basis. Then you can do some longer term things like switching to LED lights, which consume less power than the traditional, what you call incandescent light, and also even less power than the fluorescent lights. So there are things that could be done on a more long-term basis, and there are things you could do immediately. One of the long-term things that we can do would be to switch to renewable energy. And we'll have more discussion on that. But renewable energy is produced in a way that it does not burn hydrocarbons to produce carbon emissions. So, for example, solar power, wind power, and there are other types of renewable energy that can be introduced. So when you think about reducing your school's carbon emissions and its impact on climate change, there will be many options. I encourage you to brainstorm these options. Think about what can be done and bring that out in the course of this hackathon and other times as well, with CZITT, without us. Reduce the carbon emissions, reduce the impact on climate change. Change our habits so that we take shorter showers if we're using hot water. And even if you're not using hot water, the regular water that you're using from the tap also has a carbon footprint because somewhere else that water is produced through the use of energy. So almost anywhere that we could start saving, we'll save money and we will save carbon emissions. Next slide, please. How does the hackathon support this? Well, here's the magic. We are introducing you to some tools that you can use to analyze and study your electricity usage and to develop solutions. And these solutions have a wide spectrum. You can choose an awareness solution, helping people to better understand their use of electricity and the impact on climate change. Or you can do some coding that actually uses the data that we will present to you to estimate the carbon usage, to present it in different ways, and to suggest alternatives or ways to reduce it. We will develop these ideas more as we go further into this series for the hackathon. But I've given you some things to think about, which I hope that will influence you in how you operate going forward. Thank you for your attention, and I can answer any quick questions that you have.
So I do have a question for you from YouTube by Ria, and she's asking, what is a hackathon? So I know you're the best person to explain this.
Well, let me tell you what it isn't, Ria. It is not trying to get into people's information. It is not about how to break the bank's security, cybersecurity. It is, in fact, how to use digital tools and techniques to solve a problem. And in this hackathon, we are helping you to understand that there are very good tools, some of them based on artificial intelligence, others based on clever and creative coding that you can do, you can apply to the whole carbon problem. So look it up, read up some more, but our hackathon is intended to help you to develop a hack, which is a hack in terms of a tool and the application of tools towards solving the problem. Any others?
None from our participating schools. However, if you want to give a little insight as to how the data that is being collected, how on the day of the hackathon are they going to be utilizing this data, and in what type of forum? Because I guess these students are wondering what exactly are they going to have to be doing on the day. So I guess they want to kind of get a little more understanding as to how it's going to happen.
Well, here's the hack for that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you will know when new videos are put up. Follow us on Instagram where we publicize these sessions, and stay tuned because that kind of information is going to come later on in this series. We are giving it to you in biteable sizes. So I hope that you will internalize the things we spoke about today, and that this would keep building up in terms of your knowledge and awareness. towards the date of June 12th, when we will have the actual hackathon. Stay tuned.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Baldev Singh, for that insightful presentation. I know the students truly appreciated it. Students, what you have heard is directly connected to the work in this hackathon. Energy and climate change are not abstract concepts. They are reflected in how your school operates every day. And that means you have the opportunity to make a real difference. So the focus now is simple. Take what you've learned, apply it to your data, and develop solutions that are practical and impactful. Remember, it's not about the most complex idea, it's about the most effective one. Use your tools, work as a team, and stay focused on solutions that can actually be implemented. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you and your ideas come to life. See you soon.